Good evening, I'm Ces Orenia Drilon.
And I'm Sean Yao.
The big stories tonight. The policemen he once led are now the same ones trying to arrest Senator Bato de la Rosa. Tracker teams have been deployed to serve the ICC warrant on the lawmaker.
It's a favor for a friend and not a fugitive. That's how Senator Robin Padilla sees having given Senator Bato de la Rosa a ride from the Senate to Makati in the wee hours of the morning on May 14.
And Senator Ping Lacson says a leadership change is in the works in the upper chamber with Win Gatchalian-Ide as the next Senate President.
Senator Bato is still inside the country and we will be enforce the warrant of arrest and we will do our duty.
They cannot unilaterally declare the arrest warrant enforceable without it going through the proper scrutiny of the courts.
Mas maganda siguro, sumuko na lang siya. Kasi dalawang bagay naman yan Arestuhin ka o sumuko ka. So here's an option na sumuko.
The hunt is on for Senator Bato de la Rosa, last seen in public 8 days ago, and is now nowhere to be found.
Law enforcement agencies have sent out teams to find the former PNP chief and serve the ICC's warrant for his arrest.
Of course, de la Rosa's lawyers maintain the manhunt for their client is premature. News 5's Mon Gualvez has tonight's big story.
Senator Bato is fugitive from justice. And he should be brought to the ICC to face the charges before him.
Law enforcement tracker teams are now picking up the trail of Senator Ronald Bato de la Rosa. On Thursday, May 21st, the Justice Department gave the green light to a manhunt and ordered the arrest of Duterte's former top cop based on the warrant issued by the International Criminal Court. The National Police has now been mobilized to look for De La Rosa, most if not all of its 228,000 personnel. The PNP is focusing their search domestically, with De La Rosa believed to be staying put and opting not to seek refuge abroad.
Senator Bato is still inside the country and we will be enforce the warrant of arrest and we will do our duty.
When pressed for more information on the hunt for De La Rosa, CIDG Chief Morico declined to comment further.
We must remember na dati siyang PNP officer. So I'm sure minutes or even now nanonood siya ng anong ito.
Okay.
And from my expression, body language, and the way I answer, ano niya po yun, i-interpret niya yun.
Understood.
He is a good intelligence officer.
The hunt for Senator Bato will not be an easy task. The PNP will be devoting a big chunk of its resources to finding and hopefully arresting him. That's why PNP Chief Police General Jose Melencio Nartates Jr. called on Bato to just surrender.
Imagine yung paggastos natin, utilize the resources in the conduct of manhunt, in the implementation of warrant of arrest, and other police operation to implement that. It involves a lot of resources.
When De La Rosa was staying at the Senate, it was reported that he had expressed intention to seek protective custody from the PNP. That option, Nartates says, remains open.
Seeking protective custody is meaning that is surrender, Odi. Kung by all peaceful means he will surrender, yield himself, di mas maganda. Okay? Para mag-concentrate tayo sa iba pang wanted person.
The National Bureau of Investigation has also started tracking down De La Rosa.
There's already an order from DOJ for us to enforce the warrant issued by the ICC. So there's no reading between the lines. Simple lang, we'll enforce the warrant. Pag nakita namin siya, arestuhin namin siya. Pero hinahanap namin siya ngayon. The warrant is valid. It can be enforced.
But in an interview with One Balita Pilipinas on 1PH, De La Rosa's lawyer, Jimmy Bondoc, declared the Justice Department's order is premature.
Yung sinasabi nila ngayon na opinion nila, that is not yet controlling. Ang magiging controlling po ay decision po ng Supreme. They cannot unilaterally declare the arrest warrant enforceable without it going through the proper scrutiny of the courts.
Bondoc also maintained that Dela Rosa cannot be called a fugitive just yet.
Paano po magiging fugitive kung walang kaso? Therefore, pagdating po sa harboring or aiding, abetting, obstruction of justice, no? Paano po malalabag din yon kung wala ngang nilalabag pa yung principal? So, there are no laws being broken here.
Bondoc also questioned why Philippine authorities are the ones seeking for an Interpol red notice against their client.
Alam nyo po, mabigat yan, no? Kasi usually po, ang nag-a-apply niyan yung mga ibang bansa na either kalaban natin or sinusubukan kunin ng ating isang citizen, no?
But for local law enforcement, the DOJ's order is clear.
Baka nanonood siya, mas maganda siguro, sumuko na lang siya. Kasi dalawang bagay naman yan Arestuhin ka o sumuko ka. So here's an option na sumuko.
Meanwhile, in a forum this Friday, former CIDG and PNP Chief Nicolas Torre III was asked about the chance of him lending his expertise to capture Dela Rosa. As current general manager of the MMDA, this was Torres' reply.
Part pa rin naman ako ng gobyerno Kaya sa Manhunt, in terms of Manhunt, pwede talaga kami sumali. Binabantayan namin, malay mo, nagtago sa landfill, nagtago sa estero, nagtago dyan sa kalsada. Ayan, pwede nyo kami maasahan dyan.
Torre previously led operations involving Pastor Apollo Kibuloy and the enforcement of the ICC warrant against former President Rodrigo Duterte. For News 5, Mon Gualvez, we are One News.
Meantime, Senator Robin Padilla has admitted to allowing Senator Ronald De La Rosa to board his vehicle to leave the Senate complex last May 14. But Padilla said at the time, there was still no arrest warrant for Bato. In a statement, Padilla stressed there was no escape as nobody stopped them from leaving. Padilla stayed at the Senate for several days to accompany his fellow Duterte supporter who was also under the Senate's protective custody. Padilla went on, he informed De La Rosa that he needed to go home on the morning of May 14. De La Rosa supposedly asked for a ride and got off in Makati City where the latter's own vehicle waited. Padilla's statement matches CCTV footage from the Senate showing the two senators leaving the premises at 2:30 a.m. Thursday last week. In the same statement, Senator Robin also rejected the fugitive label on De La Rosa. But for Akbayan Party List Representative Percy Sendanya, Senator Padilla may be held liable under the Rome Statute for escorting De La Rosa out of the Senate premises.
Ang nakakatawa dito, paano masasabi ni Sen. Robin na hindi niya itinakas si Sen. Bato? Inamin niya na siya mismo ang nag-udyok na umalis ito sa Senado at siya pa ang may-ari ng getaway vehicle. Baka na-FOMO si Sen. Robin kay Digong at Bato. Ayan tuloy, na-violate niya ang Article 70 ng Rome Statute on offenses against the administration of justice dahil sa pag-obstruct niya ng enforcement ng ICC warrant. Imbes na maging palusot, nagmistulang confession ng pahayag ni Sen. Robin. At the very least, our authorities should investigate and question Sen. Robin on the whereabouts of Bato and file the necessary charges. Isang kahihiyan ng pagkakanlong ng ilang senador sa taong nagpapatay ng libu-libong Pilipino. Pwede na sana madagdagan pa itong nakakahiyang pagsasalaula sa katarungan at karapatang pantao. If the government is serious in capturing this fugitive, then a nationwide manhunt is absolutely necessary.
Now let's discuss the legalities of the hunt for Senator Bato de la Rosa. And joining us tonight is Attorney Paulo Tamase, an Associate Dean and Professor at the UP College of Law. Good evening, Attorney Tamase.
Good evening to you and to your viewers.
All right. Let's go first to the DOJ interpretation of the SC denial of the TRO, which is being challenged by the camp of Senator Bato de la Rosa. Is the DOJ interpretation sound?
My sense it's sound. The fact that the court already announced ahead of time that it would deny the TRO means that there is legally nothing that stops the DOJ from going with its best interpretation of the ICC warrant as well as its powers under RA 9851. And I think the thing that changed other than the Supreme Court's expected denial of the TRO is actually the seemingly unified position of the executive department for the first time in quite a few weeks, right? That they would be proceeding to arrest Senator Dela Rosa. So I just want to engage what Attorney Bondoc said in the clip that you said, which is that it has to await a Philippine court and that the DOJ can't read the warrant on its own. It seems though that there's nothing that actually stops the DOJ at this point because the Supreme Court itself is going to or already has announced the denial of that provisional order.
Now, the authorities believe that the senator is still in the country, and if this is a hypothetical question, of course, if he is arrested, what happens next? What are the options of the government? Should he be shipped off immediately the way they did to The Hague, the way the former president was, or will he be in custody while the SC tackles the main points of the case? Because what it released was just on the TRO itself.
So if we're looking at the current articulation of the government's policy, which is the best articulation of that would be the comment filed by the Solicitor General in the TRO proceeding. The suggestion seems to be that upon apprehending Senator Dela Rosa, that they will surrender Senator Dela Rosa to the ICC because that is precisely what RA 9851 provides. RA 9851 doesn't provide for an extended procedure to process somebody who was arrested under an international warrant. It just reflects the Philippines' pronounced obligation that it will comply with these types of issuances. And that's important, especially because RA 9851 was enacted by the Senate even before we entered into the Rome Statute. So our system considers that as really our part of our international obligations.
But the plea or the case of Senator Boto is not yet completely rendered by the SC. It still has to rule on the main argument made by his lawyers.
That's right. And that's important to emphasize that what the court denied last Wednesday was the application for a temporary restraining order. It doesn't actually rule on the merits yet of the decision. But that doesn't mean that the court can't rule on the merits of the decision in Senator Dela Rosa's case, even when he's in The Hague already, or if he has been surrendered there. The issue will still be relevant. The court can continue to rule on it because it might have application to future cases, especially those involving other co-perpetrators or co-accused in the ICC proceedings. And so that's why I think the Supreme Court's announcement last Wednesday took a lot of people by surprise because it's unusual for the court to issue a denial of a TRO via a press conference. It's also unusual for the court.
Right, because
Yes,
they
exactly.
still have to publish it on Monday, right? The full decision.
Yes. It's equally unusual that they announced a date for when they would actually issue the resolution. So normally they will just say that a full copy of the resolution will be provided once it's ready or once it's been finalized. But they set the date for Monday. So those two unusual, and just to add, the third unusual circumstance is that the press release doesn't include any explanation for why the TRO was denied. And normally the court includes at least a brief paragraph to describe what the core of the decision or the resolution was. So all of this just adds to the complexity of this case. But returning to the DOJ's position, the rule is that if the court doesn't stop a party from proceeding, then that party, like the government, can simply proceed using its best judgment. And it seems like the best judgment, according to the DOJ, is to proceed with the arrest.
I'd like to go back to the point where you said we're unusual. Why do you think the SC had to do it in this manner? Because of the urgency of the situation?
I think it's hard to speculate. I mean, the Supreme Court is itself really a black box in how it decides these cases. But I think if I wanted to guess in good faith, it might be also as a way to diffuse the situation in a way that, the uncertainty really arose last week when the attempted arrest happened during the Senate coup, and that has been hanging over the head of the Senate for the last few days, even as it started this very important impeachment trial. So this ruling from the court that it would not stop or it would not issue a TRO against the government might be a way to at least provide some clarity in the legal uncertainties. I mean, objectively, we have to acknowledge that the case of Senator Dela Rosa is quite unique. It's not every day that we get to encounter this type of international warrant. So the law is itself in flux at this point. But it might be precisely that. The court might be trying to diffuse the situation by providing at least some certainty moving towards Monday.
Speaking of that, and having said all of that, Attorney Tamase, I wanted to ask you honestly, like in your most impartial opinion, does the constitutional argument still exist? Is there still space to debate, whether or not a Philippine judicial warrant is still warranted, or is it enough to effect a treaty-based surrender? Because that seems to be at the crux of everything. And of course, either side will argue as they will, right? But in your unbiased opinion, should the SC come out and clarify that?
On balance, I think it's something that the court will clarify in the final decision. It's not something that the court can clarify at this point. That's not something that normally the court would do at this preliminary provisional stage on the TRO. But on balance, I think the Constitution really doesn't stop the government, especially the executive department, from implementing the ICC warrant. And let me just give 2 quick points. The first is, if you read Article 3, Section 2 of the Constitution holistically, it talks about the necessity for a judge to issue a warrant before an arrest happens. But there's a reason behind that provision, and that goes back to martial law, where warrants could be issued not just by a judge but by any normal officer. And so at the core of that provision is really ensuring some process on the part of the person to be arrested or the accused in a criminal case. The process in the ICC is a robust process, and therefore a warrant that is issued by that international court, confirmed by our own laws, which recognize the validity and enforceability of those warrants, namely RA 9851, that seems to more than satisfy what the evil or at least prevent the evil that the Constitution seeks to prevent. And on a second point, I think in the particular case of Senator Dela Rosa, he would still have all of these opportunities to question the validity of the warrant, but before the proper forum, which is the ICC, not the domestic courts in the Philippines, whether the Supreme Court or a lower court. So, to give him an additional process or additional processes in domestic courts would unduly lengthen a warrant proceeding, and it might frustrate the very purpose for that warrant proceeding. The only reason why warrants exist or warrants are issued is for accused to be brought before the court and to answer the charges there. So if he's allowed to relitigate so many of those issues in the domestic court, then the ICC structure would fail, at least as to him.
But Attorney Tamase, that's precisely what they're seeking to prevent, because it would render it moot. He'd be there.
And he's probably not going to come back.
Yes.
Yeah.
So they are they're trying to seek every remedy so that he won't be brought to The Hague. Is there a scenario you're imagining? I guess the question is there a scenario where he's already at The Hague and then he gets a favorable judgment on the warrant? Maybe not.
Absolutely. I think if he's able to show that, the charges don't merit confirmation, he can be back in a matter of months. If he's able to show that the warrant was improperly issued or issued in violation of the Rome Statute or the ICC's rules of court. So he can have and prove all of those grounds. But if he cannot, because the facts are not in his favor or the law is not in his favor, then we should precisely go on to try him so he can present his defense. So just because it's inconvenient for him doesn't make the process illegal. That's not that wouldn't be the measure of whether the ICC process is valid.
Okay, all right. But one quick follow-up. Can the camp of Senator Bato also go to the Supreme Court, let's say he's arrested, and seek urgent relief to issue a TRO on him being brought to the Hague? Is that a
Yeah,
possibility?
there's nothing. Yes, there's nothing that stops the court from doing that or stops the party from doing that. So a TRO application is only provisional. It means that given the facts that have been presented to the court, there doesn't seem to be any clear legal right to the remedy being sought or an urgency to the remedy being sought. So there are specific requirements for a TRO, but that's really the heart of it. There's no clear legal right, there's no urgency. There may be developments between that denial of the TRO and Senator Bato's arrest, where the court is presented with facts that would now show urgency or would now show a clear legal right. So it is possible for the party who loses a TRO application to reapply in the course of the proceedings. I think we do expect them, in fact, to file a motion for reconsideration. But suppose additional facts arise, there's nothing that stops them from going back to the Supreme Court.
Okay, well, this arrest is already premised on the previous one, the former President Rodrigo Duterte. And it was retired Supreme Court Justice Adolf Ascuna who said that actually yung shortcoming, that requirement for the arrestee to pass through the local court, it's merely like just to confirm that you really are who you are and to be read your charges. And it's kind of procedural. He also pointed out that in the case of the former president, that was cured by the ICC, and that was in fact the last time that we saw the former president. Tama po ba yung, or do you agree with that point of view?
I absolutely agree with that. And I think it ties to what I was saying earlier is the spirit and the purpose behind Article 3, Section 2 on the warrant requirement. At the core of that is really you are giving the accused an opportunity to prove, for example, that he is not the person that's supposed to be arrested. It's not supposed to be the litigation over his liability or his criminal liability. In Senator Bato's case, that will happen in The Hague. And therefore, if Philippine authorities are satisfied that the international warrant is valid and they're acting in accordance with a statute passed by Congress, i.e. RA 9851, then that should be enough. No local court order seems to be necessary, and that wouldn't necessarily violate as well Article 3, Section 2.
Now let's go into the merits of the case. The camp of Senator Bato has argued that the lack of an IRR or implementing rules and regulations on the law that the government is invoking is possibility could render the deliverance of the arrest warrant shaky.
I would absolutely disagree with that. So laws do not require the passage of an IRR for them to be effective. Laws only require that they be passed by both houses of Congress, that they are signed or impliedly approved by the president, and that they are published. And then after a certain number of days, generally 15 days from that publication, they become law. And the executive is thus able to implement the law already. In practice, we do have agencies issuing IRRs to provide further detail. But until those IRRs are issued, and unless the statute itself says that an IRR is necessary before the statute becomes effective, then the executive department, which has the power to implement the law, will simply implement the law based on its own best judgment and discretion, or how it understands, in this case, RA 9851.
All right.
So it doesn't require an IRR for it to be effective. The executive can simply read the provisions there and carry them out.
Another question, Professor. Well, this is delving into the political side, but you may want to answer, because you said that this time the executive is clear about how it wants the arrest warrant implemented. But there was confusion in the early days as to their position on the legality of the ICC warrant. What do you think caused this, or were there really legal concerns that had to be addressed?
Or before you answer, is it because of the TRO? Were they just waiting for that TRO to not be granted or to be granted?
I honestly don't think the executive department is waiting for the TRO. I think, there are two factors that contribute to this. The first is really we have to acknowledge the difficulty, the newness, or the novelty of Senator Bato's case. This is not a run-of-the-mill litigation in courts. We have no previous jurisprudence on this. The Supreme Court has not yet weighed on this. And, there are arguments really for both sides. It's just that in the last few days and weeks, I think academic consensus at least has formed around the position that it can be implemented even without a further Philippine warrant. So the difficulty would contribute to that lack of clarity. But the second is really the absence of a declared position on the part of the president. And I think normally in the executive department, we have a system which we call a unitary executive. Everyone in the executive department is just an extension of the president. So you have the Secretary of Justice, the Secretary of Interior and Local Government, the NBI, the CIDG, the Solicitor General, who only weighed in recently. All of them had different positions on the matter. And it's only after, I think, the Solicitor General articulated a clear position on the matter because of the PRO application, that the other branches of government or the other agencies of the executive department realized that, there's actually some support for carrying this out. But definitely the matter would have been simplified if the call came all the way from the president.
Wala na kasing legal advisor. I think.
That might be the case. I think there's a presidential legal counsel, but in any event, I think it's less about the law is uncertain, and I think the law will be uncertain on many other issues. But having an executive that actually calls the shots and risks the political capital when he makes those shots is necessary for a unified position in government. I think the case might be that. Yeah, I think the case might be that he might not have the capital, at least he perceives that he might not have as much capital as he would want at this point.
The political will, actually. Well, before we go to another matter, the vote was 951. What does this tell you? Because in a previous case, well, in the impeachment case of the vice president, the court was unanimous in ruling that the one-year bar was violated. In this case, the vote was 951. How would we interpret that?
Yeah, I wouldn't read too much into it for two quick reasons. The first is that this is a provisional remedy, which means that we're only looking at a very narrow requirement, but very narrow but strict requirements for the grant of a TRO. We have clear legal right, urgency. And then unless, it's possible that the court might still rule in favor of Senator Bato in the final case or in the final analysis, but just don't see the necessity for a TRO at this point. The reverse may also be possible, that all of them would rule against or in favor of the validity of the TRO, but some of them would want to preserve the status quo at the moment, and hence the 5 votes. So it's hard to read based on the provisional vote. The second thing is that vote is not as big or as narrow. It's, you need 2 votes, actually, just 2 votes to change. So it's not a razor-thin margin, but it's also not an overwhelming win. So there's still some pressure on the part of the government to win the case at the end of the day.
All right. Now, on to another senator, Senator Robin Padilla. Would you consider his actions somehow aiding a fugitive or obstruction of justice?
I think in layman's terms, it's fair to conclude that he was aiding a fugitive just by how ordinary people we can ordinarily understand it. But if we're talking about obstruction of justice, that's a specific statute in our laws that I think is Presidential Decree 1829. And the difficulty with that law is that first, that law seems to suggest or has language which suggests some form of local procedure. And, therefore, in addition to the fact that this is an ICC warrant, an international warrant, or international court warrant, and that Senator Padilla would have his own defenses based on fact, there's not that much clarity in the law whether it would apply to his particular case, just objectively speaking. And further complicating that is this rule in construction of laws where we construe criminal law strictly. So if it's a crime that doesn't, or it's an act that isn't really criminalized, we can't overextend the law to include it as a criminal act. So this is not to say that what Senator Bato did was, what Senator Padilla did was right. I think it was questionable. to a great extent. I think it made, it put the Philippines in ill repute when it comes to, a sitting senator being under a watch
Spirited
by
out.
an international court. Yeah, and then so it's not good, but it might not be criminal, and that's just the limits and the realities of our criminal statutes.
Is he correct in pointing out that the warrant was not yet in effect then, because the case was still pending before the Supreme Court when he brought out the senator and made him hitch in his car? Is that
I don't think I don't think that might be that's not exactly correct in terms of the court's decision doesn't really result in the validation or invalidation of the warrant. It just concerns whether it will be valid or invalid at the time that the court decides. But today we're using our best guess. So that might not be the real or the best defense for him. The best defense might be lack of intent. So there are issues as to whether this kind of law requires a criminal intent. There seems to be some suggestion in the statute that it does. And so that might be a defense for him. But, I'm not sure if it's a good faith defense to say that just because the Supreme Court hasn't validated the warrant from the ICC, that it would be invalid or it wouldn't be operative. Yeah, we don't usually wait for the Supreme Court to validate warrants of lower courts. So if this is something that was being enforced already by law enforcement, then unless a court stops law enforcement from executing the warrant, they have every right to restrain somebody and surrender in this case.
And what about finally the Senate Sergeant at Arms? Does he hold? What is the offense that he committed? What could he be charged
So I think says the same defenses for Senator Padilla as to obstruction would be available to him. But there are many other potential crimes he committed, right? That discharge of a firearm, for example, might be alarms and scandals or something else in the revised penal code. It's a long statute where you can pick and choose many crimes there that might have been committed. I think what it highlights, however, is that first, we still don't know a lot about what happened in the Senate that week. It's been 2 weeks already, 2 working weeks since the incident. And, versions from different sides are still coming out. And the second is it indubitably tarnished the reputation of the Senate. So I kind of echo what was said on the floor, I think on Wednesday, by Senator Hontiveros, that it is important to actually investigate this by somebody who's independent. A lot is riding on the reputation of the Senate, especially at this critical time. We're having an energy crisis. The impeachment is ongoing. We need a reliable or an upper house of Congress that we can trust. And therefore, looking for accountability within the Senate for what happened last week during the attempted arrest of Senator Bato might be a critical step to restoring that reputation.
Many, many thanks for your insights, especially on a Friday night. Thank you so much, Attorney Paulo Tamase of the UP College of Law.
Meanwhile, we are going to pause for a quick break, but coming up, Senator Ping Lacson admits he had considered resigning amid the many controversies hounding the Senate. The big story will be right back. Keep it here.
Welcome back to the Big Story. The International Criminal Court's pretrial Chamber 1 has denied the request of former President Rodrigo Duterte to appeal the confirmation of charges against him. The 12-page ruling said the defense team's arguments, including claims of Registry said Duterte experienced several rare falls inside his detention facility. Each time, the detention staff responded immediately, provided medical assessment, and adjusted the former president's cell to improve comfort and movement. No falls have been recorded in the past 30 days.
And just as oil prices are forecast to rise again next week, the government hits the brakes on its service contracting program for the public transport sector with no extension in sight. News 5's Gerard De La Peña with the report.
For almost a month, Marco counted on the 2 peso fare discount when he commuted to and from work. The amount seems meager, but for Marco, it goes a long way.
Medyo malaking tulong din po kasi medyo nababawasan po expenses namin. Isang buwan din pong medyo nakatipid ng konti.
So for Marco and other commuters, it's a letdown that after Friday, May 22nd, this reprieve from the Transportation Department service contracting will end. This program also offers subsidies for public utility vehicles for every kilometer run during the rush hour. That's 100 pesos for buses, 40 pesos for UV Express and modern PUV units, and 30 pesos for traditional jeepneys. For one transport cooperative, this program had been a big help.
Tingin ko naman nakatulong pa rin. Kahit sabihin mong may discount, nakatulong pa rin. Hindi nga lang po, tulad sinabi ko kanina, hindi lang ganun kalaki, pero kagandahan kahit papano, nakatulong din kami.
But there are cooperatives yet to receive payout from the government. That's why they make do with limited resources to tide over members.
Ang ginawa po namin kasi talagang para makasurvive lang po kami dyan sa service contracting. Hinati ko po yung biyahe. So yung may group 1, may group 2 pong bumibiyahe. Isipin po ninyo, pag umalis po kami rito, kung 10 lang sakay, tapos po, tatakbo po tayo. Ay ngayon, pagdating mo doon, kung 10 lang, magkano yan? Magkano po ba yung diesel, di ba? O 80 humigit. Magkano yung 10 pirasong pasahero?
The LTFRB has an explanation for this. There were issues with the routes of still unpaid cooperatives, but the agency has since assured payout next week. For now, the discount and subsidy program meant to help commuters and PUVs cope with the oil crisis will not be extended.
We only work on the budget available and alam naman po natin 800 million lang yung nakaalat because nung ginawa po yung ating 2026 budget, wala pa naman po tayong crisis at that time. Pero nag-request kami ng additional budget, but we're leaning towards shifting to the fuel discount.
There's still relief in sight though. Next week, the Maritime Industry Authority or Marina will implement service contracting for passenger vessels. Among the chosen routes are Batangas, Calapan, Puerto Galera, Guimaras, Lapu-Lapu, and Liloan in Cebu, as well as Negros Oriental, Zamboanga City, Basilan, Davao, and Surigao.
So we identified lang mga commuter type services. So ito po yung mga biyahe na less than 2 hours. Ito yung tumatawid lang talaga sa mga from island to the mainland to work, to go to school, to do some business, or to get some basic commodities.
Under this program, passengers will only have to pay the February rates, or those in place before shipping companies enforce the fare hike. 1 million passengers stand to benefit from the project per day for 2 weeks. Marina is also studying requesting additional funding to sustain its fuel subsidy distribution.
So sa fuel subsidy, kasama yung mga ro-ro operators at even yung mga pure cargo, lalo na yung nagkikarry ng ating mga basic commodities and agricultural.
Still in transport, the Energy Department is seeing another increase in oil prices as no permanent truce to the Gulf War is stricken.
Mataas na hon chance na may increase tayo. Ang apat na trading, ang estimate natin is mga around 1.5 peso per liter sa gasolina, diesel, and kerosene. Posible lang ito mabago kasi may isa pang araw tayong hinihintay.
For News 5, Gerard De La Peña, we are One News.
In related news, the Bangko Sentral is weighing an off-cycle interest rate hike to combat growing inflation risks. On One News's Money Talks, BSP Governor Eli Remolona said the hike is on the table ahead of their scheduled June 18 Monetary Board meeting. Policymakers are battling stagflation fears as the Middle East conflict drives up fuel and transport costs. Higher prices are also hitting poorer households. The central bank will decide whether to act immediately or wait for the May inflation report due on June 5.
I think the next CPI number comes out June 9. So at this point, it's a toss-up whether we do an off cycle or we just wait for the regular meeting. We're trying to be proactive. We're trying to stay ahead of the curve, and that we're serious about inflation. So far, it's on transport fares, but of course, food is now affected. And then fertilizer is a downstream good relative to oil, but it also affects the price of food. But the one that affects us the most in terms of the easing or hiking cycle with the monetary policy of the Fed. So we watch that and its implications for the world, the global economy, and we take that into account.
Now we go back to the upper chamber. Senator Ping Lacson has thought about resigning. That's as the Senate endures fallout from events of the past 2 weeks. In his interview on our sister program Storycon, Lacson also revealed an active plot to change the Senate leadership yet again. Here's the story. Rumors of a leadership coup in the upper chamber persist given the thin majority Senate President Alan Peter Cayetano holds. All it takes now is just 2 senators from the majority bloc to jump ship to install another leadership. For Senator Ping Lacson at this point, Senator Sherwin Gatchalian has emerged as the most acceptable SP.
Yung pagpapalit ng liderato, in this present situation, it's in the works. Ang aming matigas na posisyon, sasabihin ko na ito, no? Nagkaisa-isa kami kasi sa tingin namin, ako mismo nag-propose ito, medyo untenable yung posisyon ni Tito Sen. So naging compromise, ang aming bet na maging Senate President, si Senator Sherwin Gatchalian, who may be acceptable to all 11. Acceptable na siya sa aming 11. Steadfast na kami rito. Hindi na ito mababali. Ang pinag-uusapan na lamang, kasi ang tingin namin, si Senator Sherwin, acceptable doon sa pwedeng tumawid. Kasi nga, ang naging problema ni Tito Sen, ang comment sa kanya ng ilan, at least yung tumawid sa kabila ngayon, narinig namin na hindi siya marunong mag-alaga ng kasamahan.
In an interview this Friday, Gatchalian had expressed readiness to take on the Senate presidency if elected by his colleagues. Gatchalian, who recently chaired the Senate Finance Committee, is nearing the end of his second term. Unity has been elusive to senators since a leadership coup ousted Tito Soto on May 11, and a shooting incident triggered panic and chaos on May 13.
May narrative na ang ginagawa, lagi binabatok agad sa minority kung merong kapalpakan na nangyayari. Kaya kailangan magsalita rin kami na teka muna, kaya napakalalim ng aming divide, yung political divide o yung bloke-bloke dyan sa Senate ngayon. Dahil nga doon sa mga gano'ng mga insinuation.
Some majority bloc senators have since accused counterparts in the minority of prior knowledge of the shooting incident. It's a charge that Lacson called offensive. The veteran senator recalled that before he left the Senate complex on May 13, he even messaged NBI Director Melvin Matibag if Senator Ronald Bato de la Rosa will be arrested.
Ang tanong ko sa kanya, sabi ko, between us, meron ba mangyayaring arestuhan sa Senado? Maliwanag yung sagot niya eh. Walang instruction, hindi kami gagalaw. Pero sinabi niya rin na meron silang tao do sa GSIS premises, do sa jurisdiction na yung area, dahil may request si GM Veloso.
Ultimately, it was now suspended Senate Sergeant-at-Arms Mau Aplaska who turned out to have fired the first shots. He aimed at NBI agents on the other side of the bridgeway connecting the GSIS and Senate buildings. And given the latest crisis confronting the Senate, Lacson, who is now serving his 4th overall term, even had thoughts about quitting altogether.
Bihira itong Senado na ito. Merong naharap sa plunder. Merong may international court. Pwedeng isa, pwedeng dalawa. Meron yung may kaso sa DOJ dahil sa insider trading. Kaya bihira itong Senado na ito. Alam mo, there were times, no, minsan nag-iisip ako mag-resign eh. Naipahayag ko na rin to kay Tito Sen na parang plano ko na mag-resign na lang as senator eh dahil sa nangyayari. Sabi niya sa akin, wag naman.
But resignation is a fleeting thought for Lacson, with the Senate having much to do to restore credibility. First, there's a shooting incident which he believes should be thoroughly looked at. And then, there's Senator Bato de la Rosa, now in hiding, but still the subject of an ICC warrant for crimes against humanity over the Duterte drug war. For Lacson, legal precedents in previous Senates should be the basis when dealing with De La Rosa's case.
A warrant of arrest is a warrant of arrest. Whether it was issued by a foreign court, an international court, or a domestic court. Maski halimbawa sabihin na nating local court o local yung warrant of arrest ang na-issue RTC natin. Ganun pa rin eh. Pwede pa rin tayong, pwede natin sabihin na minamanmanan o pinanonood tayo ng buong mundo na isang sitting senator, merong warrant of arrest na nasa loob ng Senate, nandiyan physically, pero hindi inaaresto, hindi maaresto dahil nasa loob ng premises ng Senado.
You are still watching the Big Story on One News. Still ahead.
The Big Story is back with more headlines this Friday, starting with a possible increase in the prices of basic goods. While the Department of Trade and Industry has not yet announced a hike, its informal deal with manufacturers to freeze prices already expired on May 10. Manufacturers of canned goods, processed milk, and instant noodles are already hurting by rising oil prices and higher logistics costs. Some manufacturers have already increased prices by 2 to 7%.
Meantime, President Marcos has raised the import cap on pork meat from 54,210 metric tons to 204,210 metric tons. Under Executive Order 116, the measure will be effective for 30 days. The hike in import cap is intended to address supply shortages, stabilize prices, and ease inflationary pressures. Moving on to other news, the Cybercrime Investigation and Coordinating Council, or CICC, has sued Reyna Mercedes, Isabela Vice Mayor Gerald Harold Respicio over inciting to sedition, rebellion, and unlawful use of means of publication and unlawful utterances. Among Respicio's alleged seditious remarks include a speech in Mindanao calling for the public to revolt against the government and die for Vice President Sara Duterte. NBI Director Melvin Matibag reiterates that the government is not pursuing political opponents. And the Department of Health has reported more newly diagnosed cases of HIV, or human immunodeficiency virus. Latest data showed 4,633 cases from January to March. This is higher by 9% compared to the first quarter of last year. And of these, over 1,000 cases or 24% were diagnosed with advanced HIV at the time of detection. Meantime, the National Capital Region recorded the highest number of infections, followed by Calabarzon, Central Luzon, Soxcargen, and Davao. These regions account for 62% of the total cases logged during that period.
And now this just in. The Office of the Ombudsman's Field Investigation Bureau has recommended the filing of plunder and bribery charges against Senator Rodante Marcoleta. This is in connection with campaign donations worth 75 million pesos Marcoleta allegedly received last year and which he did not declare. In the Bureau's complaint affidavit, signed May 18, it recommended plunder charges against the senator, alongside former Congressman Mike Defensor and 2 others. Marcoleta and Defensor are yet to comment on the matter.
All right, and on a much lighter note, the National Museum of the Philippines has launched a unique passport. This lets users track their journey through local history. You can collect stamps, win medals, and even tour museums wherever you are. This story from mobile journalist Jazz Paredes.
If you're a certified traveler and museum goer, then the National Museum of the Philippines passport is for you. Last May 18, the National Museum officially launched its NMP passport, where, just like a regular passport, you can get stamps from every National Museum branch across the country.
Yung passport, ang inspiration nito ay gusto namin ma-encourage ang mga Pilipino na bisitahin ang maraming museums, kung pwede lahat ng museums sa National Museum of the Philippines sa buong bansa.
This is also in line with their continuing efforts to promote history and national cultural heritage through museum visits and the passport symbolism. The stamps given in each museum feature a highlight or specimen unique to its region, giving museum goers a glimpse of the location's history. However, the stamps are only one part of the NMP passport.
So, sa stamping po is just a one feature, but actually when they have the passport, they can put doon yung kanilang favorite galleries, favorite objects, and they can also write yung personal reflections nila or notes. Meron din siyang mga trivia.
However, the NMP passport is currently limited. To get one, visitors must follow the mechanics posted across the National Museum's social media pages, which include registering through a link and attending the National Museum Day activities last May 18. For each accomplishment, participants receive a sticker, and once completed, they are awarded the NMP passport. However, the fun doesn't end there. Rewards such as medals are also given for certain accomplishments using the NMP passport.
We want them na gamitin ito, kaya meron kaming limited edition puzzle medal. So kung makakuha sila ng stamp sa 6 regional component museums, magkakaroon sila ng 1 piece. But yung central piece, yung magkakabit or para magko-connect, para mabuo yung piece, ay makukuha sa central once they complete the 3 pieces.
The challenge, only the first 100 participants will receive the medal. For those who weren't able to get a passport, worry not, as the NMP is working to make the passports available for purchase at NMP gift shops. In the meantime, you may check out the NMP Museo Guide app, which was also launched alongside the passport. It is an interactive mobile application designed to transform the museum visitor experience through features such as audio-guided tours, immersive visuals, and text designed to assist visitors with visual and hearing impairments.
Dalawa yung purposes ng online. Yung isa ay magamit yon within the museum experience. Kasi dahil sa dami ng mga ating mga visitors, hirap ng guide. So with the mobile app, self-guided yung tour mo. Second, yung iba naman walang access kasi malalayo nga yung budget na kasama doon. So through a mobile app, you can encourage everyone to see the National Museum at the comforts of their home.
Kabati Jazz Paredes, we are One News.
Now, before we go, our big picture tonight is a netizen's entry for the so-called Senate Flicks. It shows 2 men looking a lot like Senators Bato, Dela Rosa, and Robin Padilla transforming into superheroes to escape the NBI.
Huwag kang maingay, baka marinig tayo ng mga NBI agents.
Baba ka na dyan, dali. Masyado na mabigat ang tiyan ko para sa lubi na to. Bisa mo, Robin! Parang Road Runner tayo! Ingano ka! Ingat!
And so that's what they call the Batoman and Robin. The epic Senate movie, a take on the iconic duo, of course, of Batman and Robin. Oh well, I guess, you know.
How come it says Botman on the poster? Botman, Batoman. But they part, it's super worth it.
Yeah, sayang nga. I was already in the Iloilo National
Sayang, sana may
Museum.
passport
Di ba,
ka.
kung may passport ako,
Natatakan na.
Natatakan na. Going back to the Batoman, well, at least we can laugh about it a little.
What were we saying last night about this is our special skill as Filipinos?
Yeah.
I'm not sure anymore whether this is a good thing or a bad thing. Something to ponder over the
laugh
weekend.
when you wanna cry.
Yes. On that note, that's it for the big story this week. It is Friday. We'll see you again on Monday at 8 p.m.
Kapatid, we are One News, all sides, all the time. Good night and have a great week.